The dust stirred beneath Madeleine Davis's boots as she stumbled across the barren stretch of prairie, one hand clutching her swollen belly, the other gripping a worn leather satchel containing everything she now owned in the world. Blood-red sunset painted the horizon, casting long shadows as she moved further from the town that had cast her out. 6 months with child, unmarried, and alone in Wyoming territory. 1878, there could be no greater sin in the eyes of the God-fearing folk of Cottonwood Springs. Madeleine's lungs burned with each labored breath as she continued walking, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. The letter in her pocket, the one from her late father's friend promising work as a schoolteacher, had been torn to pieces by the town council upon discovery of her condition. "We don't want your kind corrupting our children," the mayor had spat, his wife nodding vigorously beside him. They had given her until sundown to leave. The first drops of rain began to fall as Madeleine spotted a small homestead in the distance, a modest cabin with smoke curling from its chimney, a barn nearby, and fenced land stretching beyond. The path leading to it seemed impossibly long as the skies opened above her. By the time she reached the porch, she was soaked through, her blue dress clinging to her frame, accentuating the roundness of her belly. She hesitated before knocking, knowing what most decent folk thought of women in her situation. But with night falling and nowhere else to go, Madeleine raised her trembling hand and rapped 3 times on the weathered door. The door swung open, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders, his face partially shadowed by the brim of his hat. He wore a simple cotton shirt with suspenders, trail-worn denims, and boots that had seen their fair share of prairie dust. His expression changed from surprise to concern as he took in the sight before him a drenched young woman, visibly with child, standing alone in the growing storm. "Madam," he questioned, eyes drifting momentarily to her belly before returning to her face with a respectful gaze. "I'm sorry to trouble you, sir," Madeleine began, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I'm in need of shelter just for the night. I can pay." She reached for her satchel, though they both knew whatever coins she possessed would be meager at best. The man's eyes softened as he looked at her, taking in her exhausted state, the fear and desperation she tried so hard to mask. Without a word, he stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Stay," he said simply, then paused, something resolute forming in his expression. "Stay forever if you need to." Madeleine stared at him, unable to comprehend the kindness of a stranger when those who had known her for months had turned her away. "I don't even know your name, sir." He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. "Wyatt Granger," he said, extending a calloused hand. "And I reckon we've got plenty of time to get acquainted, Miss Davis, Madeleine Davis." She placed her hand in his, feeling for the first time in months that perhaps all was not lost. "Well, Miss Davis," Wyatt said, helping her inside, "let's get you dried off and fed. The rest can wait till morning." The cabin was modest but clean, with a stone fireplace casting warmth throughout the main room. A wooden table with 4 chairs sat near a small kitchen area, and Madeleine could see a doorway leading to what must be a bedroom. Simple furnishings, practical rather than decorative, filled the space. "Please sit," Wyatt gestured to a chair near the fire. "I'll fetch you some dry clothes." "They'll be too big, but they're clean." When he returned with a flannel shirt and pair of trousers, he respectfully turned his back while she changed behind a privacy screen in the corner. The clothes enveloped her, but the warmth was welcome after the chill of the rain. "Are you hungry?" Wyatt asked, already moving to the stove where a pot simmered. "Nothing fancy, just beans and cornbread." "That sounds wonderful," Madeleine said sincerely. It had been days since she'd had a proper meal, surviving on what little she could afford at the general store before being forced to leave town. They ate in relative silence, the crackle of the fire and the patter of rain on the roof filling the space between them. Madeleine felt his eyes on her occasionally, curious but not judgmental. "Where were you headed?" he finally asked as she finished her meal. Madeleine stared into her empty bowl. "Nowhere particular, just away." She hesitated before adding, "Cottonwood Springs decided I wasn't fit to be their schoolteacher after all." Understanding dawned in Wyatt's eyes. "Because of the baby." It wasn't a question, but Madeleine nodded anyway. "They gave me until sundown to leave. Said I'd be a bad influence on their children." She laughed bitterly. "Apparently carrying a child is worse than leaving one to die in the wilderness." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "That's not right." "It's the way of things," Madeleine replied, the resignation in her voice betraying how often she'd heard similar sentiments. "Not here," Wyatt said firmly. "Not on my land." Their eyes met across the table, and Madeleine felt something unfamiliar stir within her, hope, perhaps. Or maybe just gratitude that in this vast, unforgiving territory she'd found a moment's kindness. "The bedroom's yours," Wyatt said, standing to clear their plates. "I'll take the chair by the fire." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," he interrupted gently. "You and the little one need proper rest." Too exhausted to argue, Madeleine thanked him and retreated to the bedroom. The bed was neatly made with a patchwork quilt, and a small window overlooked the prairie beyond. As she lay down, she placed a protective hand over her belly, feeling the baby move beneath her palm. "We'll be all right," she whispered, though she wasn't entirely convinced. Tomorrow would bring new decisions, new challenges, but for tonight at least they were safe. In the main room, Wyatt settled into his chair, staring into the dying embers of the fire. He hadn't expected company tonight, hadn't expected company ever, really, out here in this remote stretch of Wyoming. Certainly not a pregnant woman with eyes that reminded him of the bluebonnets that grew wild along the creek in springtime. "Stay forever," he had said without thinking. And strangely enough, as he closed his eyes to sleep, he found himself hoping she might. Morning brought clear skies and the distant call of meadowlarks. Madeleine woke to sunlight streaming through the small window, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back as she felt her baby stir within her. The smell of coffee and something sweet beckoned her from the bedroom. She found Wyatt at the stove, his back to her as he tended to a pan of frying batter. "Good morning," she said softly. He turned, a slight smile touching his lips. "Morning. Hope you slept well." "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "Thank you again for your kindness." "Just doing what any decent person would," he replied, sliding a plate of hot cakes toward her as she sat at the table. "There's coffee, though I reckon it might not be good for the little one." "A little won't hurt," Madeleine said, accepting the cup he offered. She studied him in the morning light, early 30s, she guessed, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun. His hands were work-worn but moved with a surprising gentleness as he served their breakfast. "You live out here alone?" she asked, realizing she knew nothing about the man who had offered her shelter. Wyatt nodded, sitting across from her. 5 years now. "Built this place myself, started with just the land and some cattle. It's not much, but it's mine." "It's lovely," Madeleine said sincerely. "Peaceful." "That it is." He hesitated before adding, "I meant what I said last night. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Madeleine looked down at her plate. "That's very generous, but I couldn't impose. Besides, I need to find work before the baby comes." "What sort of work were you looking for in Cottonwood Springs?" "Teaching. I was a school teacher back east before." She gestured vaguely to her belly. My father was friends with the town's previous schoolmaster. When father passed last year, I wrote to him, and he offered me the position. By the time I arrived, he had died as well, but the town council agreed to honor his offer. Her expression darkened, until they realized my condition. Wyatt considered this as he ate. You know, there are 5 families within riding distance with young uns who could use schooling. No proper school out this way too far between homesteads. Folks have been talking about hiring someone, pooling their resources. Hope flickered in Madeleine's chest. Are you serious? Wouldn't say it if I wasn't, Wyatt replied. Could take you round to meet them if you'd like. The Harrises, the Mitchells, the Bensons, the Parkers, and the Callahans. Good people, all of them. Would they accept someone like me? Madeleine asked, her hand instinctively moving to her stomach. Wyatt's gaze was steady. Out here, we judge folks by how they treat their neighbors, not by mistakes they might have made or hard times they've fallen on. Besides, most of these families are too busy surviving to worry about passing judgment. For the first time in months, Madeleine felt a genuine smile forming. I'd like that very much, Mr. Granger. Wyatt, he corrected gently. If you're staying a while, seems only right we use our given names. Wyatt, she repeated, the name feeling right on her lips. And I'm Madeleine, though most call me Maddie. They finished breakfast, and Wyatt showed her around the homestead, the barn with his 2 horses and milk cow, the chicken coop, the vegetable garden that needed tending, and the small creek that ran along the edge of his property, providing fresh water year-round. It's not much, he said again as they stood looking out over the land, but it's enough. It's beautiful, Madeleine countered. You've built something meaningful here. Wyatt glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. Means more today than it did yesterday, he said quietly, then cleared his throat. I'll saddle up the horses after lunch, take you to meet the Harrises first. They're the closest, just over that ridge yonder. True to his word, after a simple lunch of salt pork and biscuits, Wyatt saddled his bay gelding and a gentle mare for Madeleine. He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, careful of her condition. Been a while since I've ridden, she admitted, adjusting her borrowed skirts. Wyatt had found them in a trunk, explaining they had belonged to his mother. Betsy's gentle as they come, he assured her, patting the mare's neck. She'll take good care of you both. The ride to the Harris homestead took less than an hour. Madeleine was struck by the vastness of the landscape, so different from the crowded streets of Boston where she'd grown up, or even the relatively close-knit community of Cottonwood Springs. Here, the sky seemed endless, the prairie stretching to meet it in all directions, broken only by occasional stands of cottonwood and aspen near creeks and rivers. The Harris family welcomed them warmly, Jacob and Sarah Harris, and their 4 children ranging from 6 to 13 years old. If they noticed Madeleine's condition, they made no mention of it, instead focusing on her qualifications as a teacher. Reading and writing is important, Jacob said as they sat around the Harris family table, sharing coffee and Sarah's apple cake. But so is knowing how to cipher and understand enough science to make sense of the world. Can you teach all that? I can, Madeleine assured him. I studied at the Boston Female Seminary before teaching at a school in Massachusetts for 3 years. Sarah looked impressed. We can offer room and board plus $3 a month. It's not much, but it would be more than fair, Madeleine interrupted. Though I'm staying with Mr. Granger at present, so the room and board won't be necessary. She felt color rise to her cheeks as she realized how that might sound, but neither of the Harrises batted an eye. Wyatt's a good man, Jacob said simply. Best neighbor a family could ask for. By the time they had visited the Mitchell family, as well a young couple with twins who were eager for proper schooling, the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon. Wyatt suggested they head back and visit the other families another day. Two families already interested, Madeleine said as they rode home, her voice betraying her excitement. And neither seemed concerned about my situation. Told you, Wyatt replied with a small smile. Out here, what matters is what you can contribute. These families want their children educated, and you can do that. Where would the school be? She asked, suddenly practical. It's too far for the children to travel between homesteads daily. The old Jensen place, Wyatt said, been abandoned since the family moved back east last year. It's centrally located between all the homesteads. Needs some work, but the main room is sound enough for a classroom. As they crested the final hill before Wyatt's cabin came into view, Madeleine felt a strange sensation like she was coming home, despite having spent only one night under that roof. The thought was as comforting as it was disconcerting. "You're quiet," Wyatt observed as he helped her down from the mare, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Just thinking," she replied, "about how different everything was yesterday, how uncertain, and now." "And now?" he prompted when she trailed off. Madeleine met his gaze. "Now I have hope. Because of you." Something shifted in Wyatt's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips as if he wanted to say something important. Instead, he simply nodded and led the horses to the barn. That evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Madeleine finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why did you help me, Wyatt? You could have sent me on my way. Most would have." Wyatt stared into the flames for a long moment before answering. "My sister found herself in a similar situation 6 years back. The man who promised to marry her disappeared when he found out about the baby. Our father threw her out." His jaw tightened at the memory. "She tried to make it on her own, died in childbirth, alone in a boarding house. The baby, too." "I'm so sorry," Madeleine whispered. "I was away working a cattle drive, didn't find out until months later." He looked up, meeting her eyes across the space between them. "I swore then I'd never turn away someone in need, especially a woman carrying a child, no matter the circumstances." Madeleine blinked back tears. "Your sister was fortunate to have a brother like you." "Not fortunate enough," he said grimly. "But that's in the past now. What matters is that you and your little one have a fighting chance." "Because of you," she repeated softly. The next day, they visited the remaining families. By sundown, all 5 had agreed to contribute to Madeleine's salary as the area's new school teacher. The consensus was that lessons could begin the following week, once the old Jensen place had been cleaned up and made suitable for a classroom. "I can't believe it," Madeleine said as they rode home under a canopy of stars. "Yesterday I had nothing, and today I have a position, a purpose." "And a place to stay," Wyatt added, "for as long as you want it." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Wyatt and the men from the neighboring homesteads worked to repair the Jensen place, while Madeleine and the women cleaned it thoroughly, stocking it with slates, chalk, and what few books could be spared from each household. Each evening, Madeleine and Wyatt would return to his cabin, tired but satisfied with the day's progress. They fell into an easy routine, cooking meals together, sharing stories by the fire, Wyatt always insisting she take the bedroom while he slept in his chair. On the Sunday before school was to begin, Wyatt surprised Madeleine with a gift, a handcrafted desk for the teacher, complete with drawers and a smooth writing surface. "Wyatt," she breathed, running her fingers over the polished wood. "It's beautiful. When did you find time to make this?" "Been working on it at night after you've gone to sleep," he admitted. "Wanted you to have something proper, something dignified for when you start teaching." The gesture touched her deeply, Thank you for everything." Their eyes met and held, something unspoken passing between them. Wyatt took a step closer, then seemed to think better of it, turning away to tend to the horses. The following day, Madeleine taught her first class in the newly established school. 13 children in total, ranging from the Mitchell twins at 5 years old to the eldest Harris boy at 13. The day was chaotic but exhilarating, and when Wyatt arrived to escort her home, she couldn't stop talking about her pupil's potential. "Young Jimmy Callahan has a real gift for mathematics," she enthused as they rode. "And Sarah Harris has already read every book her family owns. With proper guidance, she could become a writer herself someday." Wyatt listened, a small smile playing at his lips. "You found your calling, it seems." "I have," Madeleine agreed, then added more softly, "thanks to you." As October turned to November, the air grew colder, and Madeleine's time grew nearer. Her belly had swelled considerably, making the ride to and from school increasingly uncomfortable. Noticing her discomfort, Wyatt fashioned a small wagon with a padded seat, hitching it to his gentlest horse so she could travel more comfortably. The families whose children she taught were equally considerate. Mrs. Mitchell, who had experience as a midwife, visited regularly to check on Madeleine's condition. Mrs. Harris brought over a cradle that her youngest had outgrown, while Mrs. Benson contributed baby clothes and blankets. "You've made quite an impression on everyone," Wyatt observed one evening as they sorted through the gifts that had accumulated. "They all think highly of you." "They've been kinder than I could have imagined," Madeleine said, folding a tiny gown. "I never expected to be accepted so readily given my circumstances." Wyatt's expression grew serious. "Maddie, can I ask you something personal? You don't have to answer if you don't want to." She nodded, sensing his hesitation. "The baby's father, was he someone you loved?" Madeleine's hand stilled on the fabric. "I thought I did," she said quietly. "His name was Charles. He was a banker's son, well-educated, charming. He promised marriage, a home, security. I believed him." She paused, the familiar ache of betrayal dulled now by time. "When I told him about the baby, he denied it could be his, called me terrible names, said I must have been with others." Wyatt's fists clenched at his sides. "That's not the behavior of a gentleman." "No," Madeleine agreed. "When my father found out, he was heartbroken. Not because of the baby, but because of how Charles had treated me. He arranged for us to move west to start fresh. But then his heart gave out, and I was left to make the journey alone." "I'm sorry," Wyatt said, his voice gentle. "No one should have to bear such burdens alone." "I'm not alone anymore," Madeleine replied, looking up at him with a tentative smile. "Am I?" "No," Wyatt said firmly. "You're not." As November progressed, heavy snow began to fall, making the journey to school treacherous. After Madeleine nearly fell from the wagon one particularly icy morning, Wyatt put his foot down. "It's too dangerous," he insisted. "The baby could come any day now. The families will understand if you need to suspend lessons until after." Though reluctant, Madeleine agreed it was the sensible choice. A note was sent to each family, explaining that school would resume after the baby's birth, and Madeleine had recovered sufficiently. With her days suddenly free, Madeleine turned her attention to Wyatt's cabin, organizing his sparse possessions, mending clothes, and preparing more elaborate meals than their usual fare. Wyatt protested that she should be resting, but Madeleine insisted that keeping busy helped distract her from her anxieties about the impending birth. One afternoon, as she sorted through a trunk of linens, Madeleine came across a small wooden box. Curiosity getting the better of her, she opened it to find a collection of letters tied with faded ribbon, a woman's gold wedding band, and a daguerreotype of a young couple on their wedding day. "Those were my parents," Wyatt said from the doorway, startling her. "I'm sorry," Madeleine said, hastily closing the box. "I shouldn't have pried." "No need to apologize," he said, crossing to sit beside her. He reopened the box, removing the daguerreotype. They were married 40 years. Pa was a farmer back in Missouri. When he died, Ma didn't last long after. Said her heart went with him. Madeleine studied the image of the young couple, seeing traces of Wyatt in the man's strong jaw and the woman's kind eyes. "They look happy." They were, Wyatt confirmed. Even through the hard times, and there were plenty, they faced everything together. He carefully returned the image to the box. "That's what I wanted, what I thought I'd have someday, a partnership like theirs." "What happened?" Madeleine asked softly. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. "War happened. I came back different. The woman I'd been courting decided she wanted someone whole." Madeleine's gaze fell to his left hand, noticing for the first time the slight stiffness in two of his fingers. "You were injured, Sharpsburg," he said simply. "Took a bullet through the hand. Doctor saved it mostly, but it's never been the same. Neither have I suppose." On impulse, Madeleine reached for his damaged hand, her fingers gently tracing the scar that ran across his palm. "I think you're whole, Wyatt Granger, more whole than most men I've known." His eyes met hers, something vulnerable and hopeful in their depths. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward until their foreheads touched. "Maddie," he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. Before he could say more, she gasped, her hand flying to her belly. "Oh, what is it?" Alarm filled Wyatt's voice. "Is it the baby?" Madeleine nodded, her face contorting with pain. "I think it's time." The next hours passed in a blur of pain and fear for Madeleine. Wyatt rode through the snowstorm to fetch Mrs. Mitchell, returning with the midwife just as Madeleine's waters broke. He was banished to the main room while the two women worked in the bedroom, Madeleine's cries piercing him like physical blows. "Is this normal?" he demanded when Mrs. Mitchell emerged briefly for more clean water. "She sounds like she's dying." "Childbirth isn't gentle, Mr. Granger," the midwife replied calmly. "But Miss Davis is strong and the baby seems positioned properly. We must be patient." Patient was the last thing Wyatt felt as the hours stretched on, Madeleine's cries growing weaker. He paced the small cabin, praying to a God he hadn't spoken to since the war, begging for their lives. Just before dawn, a new cry split the air, the indignant wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Wyatt froze, his heart hammering in his chest as he waited for Mrs. Mitchell to appear. When she did, her face was tired but smiling. "A healthy baby girl," she announced, "and Miss Davis is exhausted but well. You can see them now." Wyatt entered the bedroom cautiously. Madeleine lay propped against pillows, her face pale with exhaustion but radiant as she gazed at the tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up as he approached, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "Wyatt," she said softly, "come meet my daughter." He moved to the bedside, his throat tight with emotion as he looked down at the perfect, red-faced infant swaddled in a clean blanket. "She's beautiful," he managed, his voice rough. "Just like her mother." Madeleine's smile deepened. "Would you like to hold her?" Before he could protest, she was placing the tiny bundle in his arms. Wyatt stood frozen, terrified of his own strength, of the fragility of the life he now held. But as the baby settled against his chest, something shifted inside him, a protective instinct so powerful it took his breath away. "Hello, little one," he whispered, a calloused finger gently stroking her downy cheek. "Welcome to the world." "Her name is Hope," Madeleine said. "Hope Elizabeth Davis." "Hope," Wyatt repeated, the name fitting perfectly. "It suits her." Mrs. Mitchell quietly excused herself, promising to return later to check on mother and child. As the door closed behind her, Wyatt carefully returned the baby to Madeleine's arms. "You should rest," he said. "Both of you." Madeleine caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Stay," she said, echoing his words from that first night. "Just until we fall asleep." Unable to deny her anything, Wyatt pulled a chair to the bedside and sat, watching as Madeleine and her daughter drifted into peaceful slumber. In that moment, looking at them, he knew his heart was no longer his own. The days following Hope's birth established a new routine in the cabin. Wyatt moved his bedding permanently into the main room, insisting that Madeleine and the baby needed the privacy and comfort of the bedroom. He rose before dawn to tend to the livestock and chores, trying to minimize disturbances to the new mother and infant's rest. December brought heavier snow, effectively isolating the homestead except for occasional visits from Mrs. Mitchell and the other neighboring women, who came bearing food and offers of assistance. Christmas approached, and despite their modest circumstances, Wyatt was determined to make it special. One evening, while Madeleine nursed Hope by the fire, Wyatt brought in a small pine tree he had cut from the edge of his property. "What's this?" Madeleine asked, smiling as he set it up in a corner of the room. "Thought we might need some Christmas cheer," he replied, somewhat self-consciously. "It's not much, but it's perfect," she interrupted. "Hope's first Christmas should be special." Together, they decorated the tree with strings of dried berries, pine cones, and paper stars Madeleine cut from pages of an old catalog. Wyatt produced a small wooden angel he had carved, placing it carefully atop the tree. "My mother always said it wasn't Christmas without an angel watching over us," he explained. On Christmas morning, Wyatt surprised Madeleine with two gifts: a silver rattle for Hope and a leather-bound journal for Madeleine. "I noticed you writing on scraps of paper sometimes," he said as she ran her fingers over the smooth cover. "Thought you might like something proper to keep your thoughts in." "It's beautiful," she said sincerely, "but I have nothing for you." "You've given me more than enough," Wyatt replied, his gaze drifting to the baby sleeping peacefully in her cradle. "Having you both here. This is the first Christmas in years that's felt like Christmas." Madeleine reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "There will be many more." The promise in her words hung between them, neither quite ready to define what was growing between them, yet both unwilling to deny its existence. As winter deepened, they settled into a comfortable domesticity. In the evenings, after Hope was asleep, they would sit by the fire, Madeleine often reading aloud from one of the few books in Wyatt's possession while he worked on small carpentry projects. They talked of their pasts, their hopes, their fears, growing closer with each shared confidence. By February, the snow had begun to recede, and Madeleine started making plans to resume teaching. The families had been patient, sending occasional notes of encouragement and small gifts for Hope, but she knew she couldn't delay much longer without risking her position. "I could bring Hope with me," she suggested one evening. "She's a good baby, rarely fussy. She could sleep in her basket while I teach." Wyatt frowned, looking up from the rocking horse he was crafting for when Hope was older. "The schoolhouse gets mighty cold, and the ride there and back would be hard on her." "What alternative is there?" Madeleine asked. "I need to work, Wyatt. I can't depend on your charity forever." Something flashed in his eyes, hurt, perhaps, or frustration. "Is that what you think this is? Charity?" "I don't know what else to call it," she admitted quietly. "You've given us shelter, food, protection, asking nothing in return." Wyatt set aside his tools, facing her fully. "Have you considered that maybe I want you here, both of you?" Madeleine's heart quickened. "Why would you want that?" "Because this cabin wasn't a home until you arrived," he said simply. "Because I sleep better knowing you're under my roof. Because Hope's cries in the night don't bother me, but the thought of you both leaving does." "Wyatt," Madeleine began, uncertain how to respond to such raw honesty. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued hastily. "I just want you to know that this isn't charity. It's me being selfish, wanting to keep you close." Before Madeleine could respond, Hope began to cry from the bedroom. The moment broken, she rose to attend to her daughter, her mind swirling with Wyatt's words and her own confused feelings. That night, as she lay awake listening to Hope's soft breathing, Madeleine confronted the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with Wyatt Granger. Perhaps had been since that first night when he opened his door and offered shelter without judgment. But loving him and acting on that love were different matters entirely. She had hoped to consider, and her own independence hard-won through loss and struggle. The next morning, Wyatt was unusually quiet as they shared breakfast. Madeleine sensed he regretted his openness the night before, perhaps fearing he had made her uncomfortable. "I've been thinking about the school situation," she said, breaking the silence. "You're right about the difficulties of bringing Hope with me, but perhaps there's another solution." Wyatt looked up, curiosity replacing the guardedness in his expression. "What if I teach here?" Madeleine suggested. "Just temporarily, until Hope is a bit older. The children could come to us 3 days a week. It's not ideal, but it would allow me to fulfill my obligations while caring for Hope." "Here," Wyatt repeated, considering the idea. "We'd need to rearrange some things, make space for lessons." "We could use the main room," Madeleine said, warming to the concept. "Move the table to the center, bring in some extra benches. It wouldn't be perfect, but it could work for a few months." "I think it's a fine idea," Wyatt said, a smile finally breaking through. "I'll speak to the families, see what they think." To Madeleine's relief, the families were supportive of the arrangement. They agreed that 3 days of instruction at Wyatt's cabin was preferable to no schooling at all, and several offered to transport children from multiple families to reduce the burden of travel. By mid-February, Madeleine's sitting room school was in operation. 13 children arrived by various means: horseback, wagon, even on foot for the closest families 3 mornings each week. They brought their own lunches and departed by mid-afternoon, leaving Madeleine tired but fulfilled. Wyatt arranged his work around the school days, ensuring he was available to help manage the comings and goings of students while also tending to the needs of the homestead. He often took Hope for walks during lessons, returning her to Madeleine when it was time for feeding. One crisp March afternoon, as the last students were collected by their parents, Mrs. Harris lingered, a knowing smile playing at her lips as she watched Wyatt with Hope. "He's good with her," she observed to Madeleine. "Natural, like she was his own." Madeleine felt her cheeks warm. "He's been very kind to both of us." "Kindness is one thing," Mrs. Harris said. "The way he looks at you is something else entirely." She patted Madeleine's arm. "Don't waste too much time wondering, dear. Life out here is uncertain enough without denying ourselves happiness when it's standing right before us." The woman's words stayed with Madeleine long after she had gone. That evening, as Wyatt read to Hope from one of the school books, a nightly ritual he had established, despite the baby being far too young to understand, Madeleine watched them from the doorway, her heart full. Hope, now 3 months old, gazed up at Wyatt with complete trust, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. He spoke to her with the same respect he showed adults, explaining concepts far beyond her comprehension, as if she were his most prized student. "And that, Miss Hope, is why the earth circles the sun and not the other way around," he concluded seriously. "Though I reckon from where you're lying, it looks like everything revolves around you, which, in this house, might not be far from the truth." He looked up then, noticing Madeleine in the doorway. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough to know my daughter is getting a better education than my students," she replied with a smile, crossing to sit beside them on the bed. "Never too early to start," Wyatt said, gently transferring Hope to Madeleine's arms. "She's a quick study, just like her mother." Their eyes met over the baby's head, and something shifted between them, a mutual recognition that the arrangement they had fallen into was no longer temporary, no longer just convenient. "Wyatt," Madeleine began, gathering her courage, "I need to tell you something." His expression grew serious. "Is everything all right?" "Yes," she assured him. "Better than all right, actually. I've been thinking about what you said about this being your home but not feeling like one until we came. And I realized. I feel the same way. This feels like home in a way no place has since I was a child." Hope squirmed between them, and Madeleine adjusted her position before continuing. "I don't want to leave, not just because it's practical to stay, but because I want to be here, with you." Wyatt's breath caught visibly. "Maddie." "You opened your door to me when no one else would," she said, her voice gaining strength. "You gave me shelter, purpose, respect. You've cared for Hope as if she were your own. And somewhere along the way, without me even realizing it was happening, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, Madeleine's heart pounding as she waited for his response. For a moment, Wyatt simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with infinite care, he reached out to cup her cheek in his palm. "I've loved you since that first night," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Standing on my porch in the rain, looking like you might break if the wind blew too hard, but with a strength in your eyes that took my breath away." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. "I want you both to stay, not as guests, not out of convenience, but because this is where you belong, where we belong together." "Is that a proposal, Wyatt Granger?" Madeleine asked, her voice wavering between laughter and tears. "It's the best one I know how to make," he replied with a small smile. "I'm not a poet or a scholar, Maddie. I'm just a man who loves you and wants to be a father to your daughter if you'll have me." In answer, Madeleine closed the small space between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that conveyed everything words could not: gratitude, hope, promise, and above all, love. When they finally parted, Hope gurgled between them, as if offering her own approval of this new development. "I think that's a yes from both of us," Madeleine whispered. They were married in April, with spring painting the prairie in vibrant greens and wildflowers. The ceremony was simple, held in their own cabin with Reverend Taylor, who rode circuit through the territory every few months officiating. Their neighbors attended, filling the small space with warmth and good wishes. Hope, dressed in a gown Mrs. Mitchell had made from her own wedding dress, was passed among the women, cooed over and admired as Madeleine and Wyatt spoke their vows. The words were traditional, but the emotion behind them was anything but ordinary. Two people who had found each other against all odds, creating a family from the broken pieces of their past lives. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Taylor declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." As Wyatt kissed his bride, cheers erupted around them. Hope, startled by the noise, began to cry, and Madeleine laughingly broke the kiss to retrieve her daughter from Mrs. Harris's arms. "Our first family crisis," Wyatt joked, his arm around Madeleine's waist as she soothed the baby. The celebration continued with a communal feast, each family having contributed something to the wedding dinner. Music followed, with Mr. Benson playing fiddle while others took turns dancing in the cleared space of the main room. As evening approached and guests began to depart, Mrs. Mitchell took Madeleine aside. "Hope will stay with us tonight," she said with a meaningful smile. "Jacob will bring her back tomorrow afternoon." Madeleine hesitated, having never been separated from her daughter overnight. "I don't know. She'll be fine," Mrs. Mitchell assured her. "She knows me well enough, and you two deserve a night to yourselves." She lowered her voice. A marriage needs tending just like a garden, Madeleine. Tonight is for planting seeds. Though still uncertain, Madeleine agreed to the arrangement, kissing Hope goodbye with promises to see her soon. As the last wagon disappeared down the road, she turned to find Wyatt watching her from the porch. "Alone at last, Mrs. Granger," he said, the new name sending a thrill through her. "So it seems, Mr. Granger," she replied, moving to join him. He took her hand, leading her back inside the cabin that was now truly their home. In the fading light, he cupped her face in his hands, his expression serious despite the joy of the day. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "I don't expect. That is, I understand if you're not ready for." Madeleine silenced him with a finger to his lips. "I'm your wife, Wyatt. In every way that matters." That night, they discovered each other fully for the first time, not as rescuer and rescued, not as housemates or even friends, but as husband and wife, equals in their commitment and desire. Wyatt's touches were reverent, patient, his concern for her comfort evident in every caress. Madeleine found herself responding with an abandon she had never known possible, secure in the knowledge that this man, her husband, cherished her completely. Afterward, lying in the quiet darkness with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Madeleine felt a peace she had thought forever beyond her reach. "Happy?" Wyatt asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Completely," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible," he said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I used to think this land was all I needed, something that was mine, that I built with my own hands. But now I know it was just a place until you and Hope made it a home." Summer came, bringing with it long days of sunshine and growth. The homestead flourished under their combined care. Madeleine's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs alongside vegetables, while Wyatt's small herd of cattle grew with the addition of several calves. Hope thrived as well, sitting up on her own by 6 months, crawling soon after, keeping both parents constantly alert to her explorations. With the better weather, Madeleine resumed teaching at the schoolhouse, now bringing Hope with her without difficulty. The children adored the baby, taking turns holding her during their lunch break, teaching her simple games, and bringing her small treasures, pretty stones, feathers, wildflowers that Madeleine carefully preserved in the journal Wyatt had given her. Life settled into a rhythm of work and joy, challenges met together, and triumphs celebrated as a family. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular colors while Hope practiced her newfound sounds, babbling happily in what Wyatt insisted was perfect sense if only they were smart enough to understand. As Hope's first birthday approached in November, Madeleine began to suspect that their family might soon be growing again. Her suspicions were confirmed by Mrs. Mitchell, whose experienced eyes noticed the signs before Madeleine had even voiced her thoughts. "A spring baby, I'd say," the midwife declared after a brief examination. "May, perhaps, or early June." Madeleine waited until Hope was asleep that night before sharing the news with Wyatt. They sat by the fire, her head resting on his shoulder as they enjoyed a rare moment of quiet. "I have something to tell you," she said, taking his hand and placing it over her still flat stomach. "We're going to have another child." Wyatt's expression transformed from confusion to wonder in an instant. "Truly," he whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow undo the miracle. Madeleine nodded, tears of happiness filling her eyes. "Mrs. Mitchell says late spring. We'll have a baby before Hope's even walking properly." With a whoop of joy that threatened to wake their daughter, Wyatt lifted Madeleine from her chair, spinning her in a circle before setting her carefully back on her feet. "Careful," she laughed. "I'm delicate now, remember." "You're the strongest woman I know," he countered, dropping to his knees before her. He pressed his ear to her stomach, though there was nothing yet to hear. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I'm your pa, and I can't wait to meet you." The tenderness of the moment brought fresh tears to Madeleine's eyes. This pregnancy was so different from her first, anticipated rather than dreaded, celebrated rather than hidden, shared with a loving husband rather than faced alone. "Boy or girl?" Wyatt asked, looking up at her with such open happiness that it made her heart ache. "Too early to tell," she replied, running her fingers through his hair. "Does it matter to you? Not one bit," he assured her. "Healthy is all I care about. Though I suppose if it's a boy we should start thinking of names. Can't very well call a son Hope." Madeleine smiled. "I was thinking if it's a boy perhaps we could name him after your father, or your brother." Wyatt's expression softened. "William," he said. "My father's name was William. And my brother was James." "William James Granger." Madeleine tried the name aloud. "It has a distinguished sound, don't you think?" "It does at that," Wyatt agreed, rising to his feet. He pulled her close, his arms gentle around her waist. "And if it's another girl?" "Then I think you should choose," Madeleine said. "Since I named Hope." Wyatt considered this seriously. "My mother's name was Eleanor," he said finally, "but we called her Ellie. I always thought it was a pretty name." "Eleanor," Madeleine repeated. "I like it very much." As winter descended once more on the prairie, bringing with it bitter cold and howling winds, the Granger cabin remained warm with the promise of new life, and the love that had transformed two broken paths into one shared journey. Hope took her first steps on Christmas Day, tottering from Madeleine's arms to Wyatt's waiting hands, her face alight with triumph at this new skill. "Next Christmas she'll be running circles around us," Wyatt predicted as he swept the little girl into the air, her giggles filling the cabin. "And this one," he added, placing a gentle hand on Madeleine's growing belly, "will be watching, learning, getting ready for their own adventures." "Our own little school," Madeleine teased. "Teacher and students all under one roof." "Best kind of school there is," Wyatt replied, his eyes reflecting the joy she felt in her own heart. Spring came early that year, with March bringing unexpected warmth and April delivering gentle rains that turned the prairie a vibrant green. By May, Madeleine was heavy with child, her duties at the schoolhouse temporarily taken over by Mrs. Harris's eldest daughter, now 18 and eager for the responsibility. Hope, nearly 18 months old and talking in short but determined sentences, watched her mother's expanding belly with fascination. "Baby?" she would ask, patting Madeleine's stomach gently. "Yes, sweetheart," Madeleine would reply. "Your brother or sister is growing in there. Out now." Hope would inevitably follow up, her small face serious. "Soon," Madeleine would promise. "Very soon." The baby, however, seemed in no hurry to join the world. May turned to June, and still Madeleine waited, increasingly uncomfortable in the summer heat. "This one's taking after their pa," she complained good-naturedly as Wyatt helped her into a rocking chair on the porch one evening. "Stubborn as they come." "Hey now," Wyatt protested with a grin. "I prefer to call it determined." "Determined to drive me to distraction," Madeleine retorted. But there was no heat in her words, only the fond exasperation of a wife who knew her husband's quirks all too well. As if in response to their banter, Madeleine felt the first contraction stronger than the practice ones she'd been experiencing for weeks. She inhaled sharply, her hand going to her belly. "Maddie." Wyatt was immediately alert, kneeling beside her chair. "Is it time?" "I think it might be," she confirmed as the contraction ebbed. "But don't rush. First babies are usually slow to arrive, and second ones can be too." Despite her calm words, Wyatt sprang into action, sending their ranch hand a young man named Josiah they had hired the previous fall. to fetch Mrs. Mitchell, while he prepared the bedroom and settled Hope with a neighbor who had offered to take the child during the birth. By the time Mrs. Mitchell arrived, Madeleine's contractions were coming regularly, though still far apart. Unlike Hope's birth, which had been fraught with fear and uncertainty, this time Madeleine felt only anticipation and a serene confidence that all would be well. "This one's eager," Mrs. Mitchell declared after examining her. "Won't be the all-night affair your daughter was." The midwife's prediction proved accurate. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the bedroom in golden light, Madeleine gave the final push that brought their child into the world. The lusty cry that followed confirmed what Wyatt had suspected all along. "A son," Mrs. Mitchell announced, placing the squalling infant on Madeleine's chest. "Healthy as a horse and already making his opinions known." Tears streamed down Madeleine's face as she cradled her newborn, overwhelmed by the rush of love that surged through her. "Hello, William," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Wyatt, who had refused to leave her side throughout the labor, leaned in to press a kiss to her damp forehead, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "You did it, Maddie. He's perfect." "He has your chin," Madeleine observed, tracing a finger over the baby's tiny features. "And I think those might be your ears as well." "Poor kid," Wyatt joked, his voice thick with emotion. "At least he got your nose." Mrs. Mitchell efficiently completed her tasks, ensuring both mother and child were comfortable before declaring her work done. "I'll send Josiah for Hope in the morning," she said as she gathered her things. "Give you 3 a night to get acquainted." Left alone with their son, Madeleine and Wyatt marveled at each new discovery: the tiny fingers that curled reflexively around Wyatt's thumb, the soft wisps of dark hair that promised to match Madeleine's own, the perfect shell of his ears that did indeed resemble his father's. "I never thought I could feel this way," Wyatt confessed as William nursed contentedly at Madeleine's breast. "When Hope was born, I loved her instantly, even knowing she wasn't mine by blood. But this—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find words adequate to express the depth of his emotion. "I know," Madeleine said softly. "It's overwhelming, isn't it?" "The love," Wyatt nodded, his gaze moving from their son to her face. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything. For stumbling onto my porch that night, for staying, for giving me a family I never thought I'd have." "Thank you for opening your door," Madeleine replied. "For saying those words that changed my life. Stay forever." "Best words I ever spoke," Wyatt said, leaning in to kiss her gently. "And I meant them just as much then as I do now." As night fell fully over the prairie, wrapping the small cabin in darkness broken only by the soft glow of the lamp beside the bed, the Granger family, now 4 where once there had been only one, rested in the peace of knowing they were exactly where they belonged, together. 5 years later, Madeleine stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Wyatt taught Hope to ride her very own pony, a birthday gift for her 6th year. William, now 5, bounced impatiently beside his father, eager for his turn, while 3-year-old Eleanor clung to Madeleine's skirts, torn between curiosity and caution. "Mama, look," Hope called, her face alight with pride as she guided the gentle mare in a circle without assistance. "I'm doing it." "I see you, sweetheart," Madeleine called back. "You're a natural," Wyatt beamed with paternal pride, his hand hovering near the pony's bridle, ready to intervene if needed, though Hope seemed perfectly confident. William, unable to contain himself any longer, broke free from his father's side to run a complete circle around the pony, his energy boundless as always. "My turn next, Pa," he insisted. "You promised." "Patience, son," Wyatt admonished gently. "Your sister hasn't finished her lesson yet." Eleanor tugged at Madeleine's skirt. "Up, Mama," she requested, raising her arms. Once lifted to her mother's hip, she pointed to the scene before them. "Me ride too, when you're a bit older, little one," Madeleine promised, pressing a kiss to her youngest soft cheek. "For now, you can watch your brother and sister learn." The Granger homestead had prospered along with their family. What had once been a modest cabin was now a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a separate kitchen, and even a small library where Madeleine continued to teach the children of neighboring farms. Though the community had grown large enough that there was talk of building a proper schoolhouse in the small town that had sprung up 5 miles east. Their land had expanded as well, with Wyatt purchasing adjacent properties as they became available. They now ran a respectable herd of cattle, maintained several fields of crops, and had even planted an apple orchard that was just beginning to bear fruit. But the true measure of their success, Madeleine reflected as she watched her family, was not in the land or the livestock or even the comfortable home they had built together. It was in the laughter of their children, the strength of their partnership, the love that had grown from that first act of kindness on a rainy night 7 years ago. As if sensing her thoughts, Wyatt looked up, their eyes meeting across the yard. The smile he gave her still made her heart skip. A beat still held the same warmth and devotion that had been there when he first opened his door to a desperate young woman carrying nothing but a satchel and unborn child. "Mama, come see," Hope called, breaking the moment. "Pa says I can try trotting." "Coming, darling," Madeleine replied, setting Alina down and taking her hand as they crossed the yard to join the rest of their family. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Madeleine and Wyatt sat together on the porch swing he had built the previous summer. The prairie stretched before them, bathed in moonlight, peaceful and vast. "Happy?" Wyatt asked, his arm around her shoulders, his question an echo of the one he had asked on their wedding night. "Completely," Madeleine answered, leaning into his embrace. "Are you?" "More than I ever dreamed possible," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe how lucky I am, that you knocked on my door that night, that you stayed." "Forever," Madeleine reminded him, turning to meet his gaze, "just like you asked." "Forever," Wyatt agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss as enduring as the land they had claimed as their own, as steadfast as the love that had transformed 2 broken hearts into one unbreakable family.